Rachael Talbot practices a technique called network chiropractic. Before this, she worked in the pharmaceutical industry and competed in a masculine-dominated environment. Listen up to hear about her journey to rediscover the feminine. She'll explain how our society effectively promotes immature versions of femininity and masculinity. She believes we can recreate our society by embracing both feminine and masculine principles while moving from knowledge to wisdom. Hi, everyone. Today I've got the wonderful Rachael Talbot with us, and she's going to be sharing some of her journey and insights into her work. And I'm hoping we can explore the idea of the feminine, because she runs a podcast called Unmasking the Feminine. So I thought it'd be really good to ask the unmasker to help us understand that a bit better. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. I've never been videoed before, so this is a new experience for me.
Yeah, it's a new string to the bow. It's I think only the second one we're using, so we always see each other, but we have to be on our best behavior, I guess.
Excellent.
Rachael, please tell me a little bit tell us about your journey into chiropractic and how you got to this point.
Okay. Well, I've been a chiropractor for 20 years, which seems amazing to me. I had my first adjustment in my late 20s when I hurt my back, classic. And at the time, my boss recommended his chiropractor, and I'd never heard of it. And I was like, yeah, whatever, just get me out of pain. And I had two close friends who were both chiropractors, but they never talked about what they did. And I think about 18 months later, I spent an evening with one of them when we got drunk, as you do, or as I did in my 20s at least. And at the end of it, he said, I think you should become a chiropractor. And I said, that's a brilliant idea. And I applied, got a place, and just resigned. And I have to laugh. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry. I'd been mainly selling antidepressants and painkillers, and suddenly I was going into a completely different world. And I didn't give it much thought. And I thought I was going to fix bad backs. And that was pretty much, I just wanted to get out of what I was doing because I wasn't enjoying it. And so I did the conventional chiropractic training, learned how to do spinal adjustments, the clunk click that people associate with chiropractic, and went off into practice. And then I stumbled upon the work of Donald Epstein, who is a visionary chiropractor from New York, who has developed his own tonal technique called network spinal analysis. In fact, it keeps changing names. It was network, then it was network spinal analysis, then it was network chiropractic, and now it's network spinal. But I studied with him during the network spinal analysis years. And we use incredibly gentle touches to the spine that allow the brain to observe the body and release built-up tension in the nervous system, which promotes healing. A very, very simple way of explaining something that doesn't look that simple when people see it. And someone did it to me, a bit the same experience again. First time I had my back clicked, massive change in life. This time someone hardly touched me and I slept for 12 hours.
Wow.
And I was like, and my pain went away. And I was like, I have no idea what just happened, but I have to explore this. And that set me down the tonal route. And I pretty much stopped clicking spines within 6 to 8 weeks. But this Donny Epstein was a very, very interesting guy. And at the time I was studying it, he was teaching all the advanced seminars, and I got to go on those pretty quickly. And he was talking about health on so many different levels, physical health, which is pretty much where I'd been focused, and then emotional and mental health, and then spiritual. And I was totally fascinated. It took me into a completely different world of seeing the whole person, not just the symptoms, and something I'll be super grateful for. And then there was a point, and I'm going to go into the feminine bit now, because he started talking about masculine and feminine. I think he'd been doing a lot of work with Tony Robbins at the time. And initially he was just observing the women working and the men working and going, when a woman works, she needs to maintain the curve in her lumbar spine, whereas the guy needs a straighter spine. And I was like, well, that kind of makes sense, because when a guy is more masculine, he has a straight spine, and a woman has a more curvy spine. But then he started telling me lots of things about how the women should do stuff. And that word should has always had a big ugh with me. And quite a few of the women were going, that doesn't feel right. I don't feel like I'm being empowered to be a woman. I feel like I'm being almost put back in my place. and a quite strong
Okay.
reaction to that. So I decided I'd go off and explore. And this was probably at least a decade ago now, probably longer. I lose track of time. So I went and looked at what people were saying about feminine power. What did it mean to be powerful and feminine? And at the time, almost everyone teaching this wasn't British. So I went and explored Rachael Jane Groover, who is an Australian based in America. I did a couple of seminars with her, and it was fascinating, but she didn't light me up completely, but I got a lot from it. I think it's all stepping stones, isn't it? A few horrendous experiences, and I will not name them because I'm sure they helped some people, but they certainly didn't help me. And then I found a woman called Sabrina Lynn who was doing something called rewilding for women, and I did a lot of work with her. And she was very much about the feminine archetypes. I'd never really heard about that. So the healer, the wise woman, the wild woman. Oh God, there were so many. The dark goddesses, which I really resonated with, which is about connecting to your shadow and speaking your truth, even when it's not palatable to society. And all of this started me, it got me much more into my body. I think now a lot of people know me because I'm very much about being embodied and being present and being aware. But honestly, 15, 20 years ago, I was so disconnected from myself, from who I was. So I guess the initial thing was just exploring and starting to realize how much I didn't know. And then it took me through a big period of self-reflection because as a little girl, from a very early age, I always felt I had a bum deal because I was female and that the boys had it easier. And so I think I was quite observant. I could see the world in a way that was probably ahead of my years. But I was cross about it. I felt angry is probably more accurate. So I made a decision very, very early in life that I was going to be better than the boys. And I was going to beat them. And luckily, I don't know. I'm quite academic. I worked very hard and I pretty much beat all the boys at school. And I took up a sport. I have to laugh. I played a lot of hockey, field hockey, and I played mixed hockey because I could beat the boys. I look back and go, my God, I must have been hard work because I was super competitive. And what it actually did was it developed all of my masculine attributes. Yeah, it actually fed me more and more into the system, which I think we still live into a very big degree, which values the male attributes over the feminine. So anything that was arty-farty or touchy or feely or soft or gentle, I would dismiss as of no value. What was value is academia, achievement, facts, science, knowledge. I mean, everything.
Yeah.
I think everything is valuable, but that's what I valued. And I think my aspiration, I was born in 1970. Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, and I was so pleased a woman was in power. I look back, she was the least feminine woman. But I didn't understand that at the time.
Absolutely.
And so, I think a lot of my generation of women modeled ourselves on the kind of women who were successful in the 80s and probably 90s. And they were women who were really embodying the masculine. And I still struggle to find really good public figures who really embody the feminine.
Yeah.
I find them in the more alternative world.
Yes.
But not mainstream.
No, I totally see that. You look around and you can just see them, the women, playing in the man's world, and it's all those attributes that are valued. So they, to compete or be in the mix, they have to, because that's how they judge. That's how they judged. Absolutely. So you had the women of your generation had those role models, and so that was the way to do it, I guess.
Yeah. So I think the last probably 10 years or so have been me unpicking that and observing it in myself over and over again, which has not been comfortable. It's been really about seeing my shadow. And at the same time, it's been learning to value the feminine. And I have a lot of intuitive gifts. I'm very, very sensitive. And I always thought sensitive was another word for weak. And so I would dismiss a lot of what I could do and what I could sense and what I could feel because it was unmeasurable. And I think I remember somewhere in my 20s going, if you can't measure it, it's not real. Well, talk about eating your own words. It's, I have to laugh at myself, who I was. Yeah.
Well, it was funny. Just before we came on, I was getting ready, and I was just thinking of research and the measurability of things, and the logical steps that we take in quantitative research, and how even qualitative research, we sometimes use a scale. So, how happy are you from 1 to 10? So you have to literally rate it. And so you even then take out the embodied part of being happy and have to put it down on a scale. I mean, I'm sure there are multitudes of ways of being happy and unhappy at the same time. So yeah, I think that measurability is so important in our current worldview on science, and it's huge. I feel it's hugely limiting us because that's can only be a fact once we can measure it.
I think it was something that became really apparent to me in my early days of tonal chiropractic, of network, because at some level, I knew that was what I needed for my healing. I knew that I needed a gentle approach. I needed a softer approach. And I needed to start feeling what was happening in my body again. Whereas before I'd been very much driven by, it hurts, I feel stiff, someone's going to fix me. And so I was giving all my power to my chiropractor or my healers or whoever it was, but I wasn't owning my own healing ability. And one of the things I got taught quite early on, which again I found really hard, was part of my role, if I wanted to be healthier and I wanted to be more me, was I had to learn to listen to my body and I had to connect to my body. And at the time I was numb. I was so numbed out and I was mortified. I was so embarrassed. I was so ashamed when I was listening to other people going, well, I feel this and I feel this. And I was like, I just feel dead. If I look back and step out of the picture, I wasn't healthy. I'd worked in the pharmaceutical industry for 7 years, which encouraged the drinking, socializing, living on crap food, working stupid hours. Everything was push, 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 push. It wasn't a healthy lifestyle. And I wasn't healthy. And I hadn't recovered. I was still carrying almost that trauma in my body 10 years later. And I sort of carried on trying to live that. It was like I was half chiropractic, half medical. I was delivering chiropractic, but my beliefs were very much, I'm fixing you. That's my job. And you're broken. And I had this huge transition when I started to wake up to the more feminine side of everyone is perfect. And their health is just an expression of what's gone on to them up to this moment in life. And if they've had a lot of challenges and a lot of traumas, and I had lots of micro trauma, not like one major, I can put it all down to this event, but lots and lots and lots of little things that were out of alignment with who I am that effectively traumatized me. And that's the latest thing on trauma, isn't it? It's not about what happened, it's how you interpret it. So I had really shut down my body. And as I started to connect through all these different kinds of crazy body work, I mean, some of which was like dancing around fires and the kind of stuff that my scientific brain went, my God, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? Why are you drawn to this? And yet my heart was like, go and explore this. Go and go back to nature, get out in the woods, do things that your heart sings about rather than being sensible and logical and rational. And so I got very, very, it really opened me up to what health and healing were. And I've had a huge journey of learning how to connect to my inner resources. And it's become a huge part of my practice because Donald Epstein developed 2 different techniques, network, which is the basis of how I work chiropractically, and something called somato-respiratory integration, which has got 12 stages of healing and 12 different exercises, which you can use to get back into your body and explore your relationship between the mind and the body. And so I teach those during lockdown, I taught them pretty much every single week online. I did a huge amount of that work for almost, I think, over 2 years. And now I probably teach it twice a month. And it's really about learning to listen, because I don't think that is a feminine or a masculine attribute. And when I say feminine, I don't mean woman. And when I say masculine, I don't mean man. I mean the qualities that we put towards the two. But a huge part, if a woman historically, when I was growing up, said, I can hear that everything you says make complete sense, but it feels wrong, she would be dismissed. And I would be with the people dismissing her. And it's really taught me to listen to that side, because it doesn't matter whether that comes out of a male body or a female body. It doesn't matter who's talking. We all have an inner knowing. And I guess if you say unmasking the feminine, for me, that has been unmasking the parts of me that I had to shut down to fit in and to be what I thought successful was. And as I've started to acknowledge, I did a lot of work with a coach a few years ago on being weird, acknowledging my weird.
It sounds like we're sort of stripping away of layers more than like a single unmasking. It's sort of like, different, if there was a mask, maybe different parts of that coming off at different times.
Like being a snake. Snakes are forever shedding their skins.
Mm.
And you sort of go into the mythology and you have the phoenix rising out of the ashes, but a lot of the older myths also talk about snakes and being reborn and being like new versions of you evolving all the time. I think even in my 20 years or so in chiropractic, we understand so much more about neuroplasticity. And we used to think, I say that wrong, neuroplasticity. We used to think the nervous system was much more fixed than we now know. So I believe that we can reinvent ourselves at any time, and we can learn and we can grow and we can change. And I think, again, I had a much more rigid perspective of what was possible. I mean, I have to give that to being a chiropractor. Even in the early days, when you're a new graduate, you're not very good at adjusting and you're just doing your best. I saw so many miracles, healings that I thought were impossible. And I'm so grateful. My first boss threw new patients at me, and he threw weird cases at me because he wanted to do back and neck pain. So they screamed at the front desk and gave me all the crazy stuff. And people got better and things healed. Wonderful. But I certainly couldn't claim as a chiropractor. And all I was doing was getting their nervous systems working better, which is still what I do. I just do it in a very, very different way. So
different way. Yeah. Beautiful. It's lovely to see how those people came to you. Even then, the universe is kind of steering them towards you, which is very cool. I'd like to go back a little bit. You mentioned being male and masculine and female and feminine. And so as a man, I have both masculine and feminine traits. Do men have more masculine energy than feminine, or where is that balance between the sexes and the feminine masculine energy?
I can only talk from my own experience, and I think it's quite hard to quantify. But if we just stick with heterosexual, just to keep it simple, you would expect.
Yeah. We're not even going there.
We're not going there. But if we just take a standard heterosexual male, you would expect him to have a lot more masculine energy than a standard heterosexual female. But if anyone can be, and I think it's also something to do with your individual unique blueprint, because I think we all have a different blueprint when we come into this life. So some men are just so masculine, and some women are just so incredibly feminine. I mean, if you go into the movies, you'll find examples of the more extreme. So Marilyn Monroe is probably the ultimate feminine. If you just take, she was beautiful and she moved in such a feminine way. And now you're going to ask me for a masculine one, and I can't think in this moment. It tells you how much I follow and have a menopausal brain when it comes to names. But we all have a balance. And I think there's a time and a place to draw on the qualities of either. And I think I know we talked a little bit before we came live about, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the rise of the feminine. And
Yes.
I have so seen that happen, that more and more women are getting connected to their feminine qualities.
So what does that mean for society and where we're going?
See, that's what I was going to go into that, because I think that's really important. What's happening, I'm seeing a lot of women initially get very, very angry. And there's a lot of suppressed feminine anger, and with honestly quite good reason, because women have been treated pretty awfully in society. I mean, I think we got the vote in Switzerland in the 70s. I mean, you have to go, wow. And women still get paid less than men for doing the same work. We can go blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of anger. And a lot of women, as they wake up, want to do to the masculine what was done to them. And I think that is understandable, and it's not the solution. I think the feminine is rising in men as well. It's just less obvious. So I think men are also starting to value intuition, feelings, the softness, whilst still being able to hold on to their masculine attributes, because turning a man into a woman does not solve anything. It's actually really uncomfortable and unpleasant if you see a masculine man trying to be feminine. I've seen some of my peers do it, and you're like, horrible, yeah, because it doesn't align with them. So from a societal point of view, if we just talked about research, we start to value different things. People, I think there was definitely a time, at least in our profession, where if there wasn't a randomized controlled trial, it wasn't real. Well, we know that when people are involved and the kind of work we do, that's a really poor way of evaluating whether things work or don't work, because pretty much you're based on, does it hurt, does it not hurt? And chiropractic is it's not limited to just pain. It's actually about healthy expression and healthy habits and healthy outlook and your experience of your body and your experience of the world. Yeah. So that's something I think as the feminine energy rises. But for me, as the feminine rises, I actually think the masculine needs to rise as well. Because I think at the moment, what we're seeing a lot of society is low level of both. So an immature feminine might use sexuality to get what she wants. Or petty squabbles. You see it with the teenage girls. They get very, very bitchy. And it's not pretty. It's not attractive. And they often get what they want by behaving like that. But you don't think, wow, she's going to grow into a woman I want to love. She's going to grow into a bitchy, manipulative woman. And the immature masculine would use force, would use his physical strength to dominate, and would use the privileges that society has given him to have power over somebody else. If I'm being very simplistic. I could expand this so much, and it's not my expertise. I think it's my really interest.
No, I think it's. I mean, I think this is the important conversations we need to be having in our society, in our professions, in our families, to just kind of explore these a bit better. Because, as you say, there's the rise of the feminine, and then the kickback feels like, oh, that's toxic masculinity. Is that a thing, or is that just someone who's overtly masculine, or is that someone who's using, like you said, using force and power to manipulate?
I think
what's your view on that?
I'd probably talk immature rather than toxic, but I think they're shadows. They're flavors of the same thing. Because if you start taking both feminine and masculine, if you have a man who's truly in his wisdom, it's like the idea of a patriarch who is wise and benevolent. Yeah, someone who shares his wisdom. It's about wisdom. It's not about power. I mean, we all have power, but power, I believe, is about self. It could be used within. It's never about having power over other people. I mean, I was listening to something recently. The Chalice. I can't remember. The Chalice and the Sword. It's an old book. It was written quite a few years ago, and it talked about the old matriarchal societies, which I think you have to go back about 8,000 years. And there's been an assumption by the patriarchal, which is currently where we sit, that the women were in charge. And they weren't. they were societies of cooperation, where male and female worked together, and they used their individual skills, what they could contribute. So physically, a man is going to be physically stronger. If back in the olden days, if someone needed to hunt, man's a good choice. Yeah, because he's physically stronger. He can run for long periods of time. He doesn't have periods. Yeah, he doesn't carry babies. He doesn't feed babies. Yeah, you can see why the old ways. But in those societies, the feminine, the intuition, the ability to connect, and to,
were highly valued.
yeah, incredibly valued, and the ability to nurture. And I think a lot of healing comes from that ability as well, a lot of healing abilities. And again, I'm not saying men can't be amazing healers, because I know some amazing male healers. But there's that
Do you think
nurturing,
they're
natural,
with this?
yeah.
And do you think that the nurturing professions? I mean, look at nursing as a kind of prime example of nurturing professions. I mean, we still predominance of women in nursing, and certainly I think in chiropractic, I think the numbers are swinging more towards women in chiropractic as opposed to men, and I wonder if that's going to allow the professions to start steering things. Which would be very interesting. We mentioned the immature feminine and the immature masculine, and it reminded me of the ecocentric model of psychology as opposed to the egocentric. And in the egocentric, talk about patho-adolescence. So our society is in essentially a patho-adolescent stage. So we go through childhood, early childhood, late childhood, early adolescence, late adolescence, before we reach adulthood, and we're kind of as a society stuck in this patho-adolescent phase. So we have these, effectively, makes total sense, immature masculine, which is all about posturing, posing, maybe fighting, aggression, and as you said, and the teenage girls being bitchy and all about how I look, and very much about physical appearance and social status. And if we look around at our world leaders, I think we can see that. And so, as a society, you mentioned the wisdom and the elders. Do we have any true elders anymore? Or if they are, they don't have a stage or a platform, certainly in the mainstream. And I think if we're going to move as a society, I think we're going to have to move into an ecocentric. And you mentioned going back into nature and how you were able to connect to yourself and your feelings through that. Perhaps there's an avenue there.
I think I'm just going to go back into my models because I can explain it slightly better from my understanding. I completely agree with what you just said. I think it's almost like the people, as a mass, there's been a culture of someone will look after you, which is just how it is when you're a child. Even when you're a teenager and you're misbehaving, you know that you can run back to mummy and daddy. Even if you're angry about them, they still feed you. You have no responsibility for food on the table. There's a roof over your head. So if you're describing society in that grade, I can really see the parallels. If we just look at our relationship to the health service, I hear this with people in my chiropractic business quite regularly. They're angry that they have to pay for chiropractic because the NHS should look after them and solve all their problems. Yet they're the one that has been living on junk food, hasn't exercised for years, never meditates, never does anything that would support their health. And it's these people, it's usually the ones that really have been abusing their bodies the most, that are the ones that are angry, because there is an expectation that has been created by society that someone will look after you and someone will take all your pain away and fix you. And then you can carry on with the same life. So I actually believe we need a cultural shift back into self-responsibility. And it's something...
Yeah, so there's that lack of responsibility or someone else's responsibility.
I think if you're going to grow from being a teenager to an adult who can function, part of that, and for me it was leaving home at 19 and doing the drink too much, fall apart at university type thing. it's a transition. I wouldn't do it the same way again on reflection, though I did learn an awful lot from it. But we don't have natural ways of helping people grow up nowadays. A lot of people come out of university and they're still like a badly behaved teenager, and they get their first job.
Yeah.
And the culture of the company, because so many, that is our culture, particularly in the UK. We don't have rites of passage.
That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
And you look at, I saw, yeah, yeah. And that in itself inhibits people from taking the responsibility for their health. And people will probably get quite angry. They hear some of what I'm saying. They'll say, I take responsibility. And my question would be, but what does your body say? It's like, come back into your body, and they don't know how to do it. Because we've been taught in the UK that if you have a problem or a pain or an emotion, it's very much in our culture. And I guess South Africa's got quite a lot of this as well, from what I know of Holland. And I know the Dutch obviously had a big influence, as did the British in South Africa, is pull yourself together and get on with it. I was taught not to feel my emotions. I was taught to keep them inside, suppress my feminine, my flow of emotions, which came so naturally, pull myself together and be a good girl. Or be a good boy, be strong. Big boys don't cry. And so many of the people I work on, when you put your hands on their body, you can feel like decades of unshed tears. And a lot of people do cry when I adjust them. And it can be so profoundly healing. But yeah, we need a way of helping. Yeah, I think we need a shift in responsibility. And I think it's going to happen, because I think the NHS is going to go bust and break, and then people are going to have to find a way, which is a horrible thing. And
well, I
hate the fact that so many people will suffer because of this.
Yeah, and I think, the rites of passage. So, in our family, we've developed our own rites of passage to honor the stage that's just passed and acknowledge the transitioning into a new phase. So it's as important for us as the parents to do that, because you want your little kid to stay a little kid forever, right? It's the best. It's the best, So when my son was turning 13 and around about that age, and I designed a whole weekend away with just him and his uncles, and we went into the wilds, and I took him on a journey, and then I had to let him walk on his own to meet up with his uncle further down the road, and they gave him some advice and guidance, and so he was learning to be on his own. And then when we got back after the long walk and the day, we had a ceremony around a fire, and we took one of his old toys, and we thanked his old fluffy toy for being part of that and how beautiful that was, and then we gave the toy to the fire because it's not needed anymore. And those kind of things, and just honoring. And for me, that was as hard too, to say, oh geez, I'm letting my little boy go. And I think as a society, we don't want them to go, and we don't want our kids to grow up to go to work and be responsible. We want them to, they'll always come home again, and we'll look after them. And so I think it's not just the new generations, it's the current generations that are imprinting and not allowing that. So I think we need to do work on all levels and all ages.
I agree. I think it's so in our culture, because you go to the indigenous cultures and they wouldn't dream of not having a rite of passage. The fact that you've done it makes you so not normal. I love that you did that, but you're not normal. And I actually think it's great to not be normal, because normal
many have
at
said
the moment is struggling, because so many people are struggling. And there is so much anger and so much disillusionment and so much fear at the moment in the general population. And so, I think what you're doing is amazing. I know I've come across women's groups where they call them maiden rites, and they help young women have a rite of passage. And
fantastic.
I think there are probably still a lot of men of 30, 40, 50, 60, maybe even 70 who could still do with that rite of passage, because they didn't get it.
That's the thing.
And same with women.
And we we can go back and do those, and we can, because in each stage there's certain tasks we have to fulfill, and you can go back and revisit those. And maybe you missed something out in your late childhood or early adolescence that you didn't fully complete, and then can move to your next stage. And as adults, we want to progress through that and become elders, but we need elders to tell us what to do. I don't know if we have many of those around.
The elder conversation is interesting, because what defines an elder? So when we were kids, people were allowed to go grey on TV. Now, I am actually my natural colour. I happen to be in my 50s and I'm not grey. But that's quite unusual, because on paper, if we go through the cycles of a woman, maid, mother, crone, I'm a crone. I'm in the menopause.
Yeah.
I no longer have periods. I can no longer have children. But do I look like an elder? Probably not. But on paper, we become elders quite young. We have a lot of life. People have a lot of life experience, but our whole society has changed, because.
And I think,
who do we get our advice
that's
from?
the physiological.
Yeah,
but that's physiological age.
Yeah.
That's not. That's not. I mean, you can have an 8-year-old that acts like a teenager. So I think there's your actual chronological age, but then there's the eldership and the wisdom that should be coming with that age. And we're looking for those people to guide us, and there are some around, but are we ready to listen?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is Dr. Google myself.
And maybe the indigenous cultures have that. Yeah. And maybe the indigenous cultures have something there, and their wisdom, and allowing them to speak, and for us to listen as those adults who want to. I want to have that wisdom. I'd love to, and I presume most of us would like to be able to move into that sphere. So yeah, hopefully we can get some elders, and even give them some airtime, so that they're probably not too tech savvy, but let's see if we can get them on the stage at our seminars, and get them on our podcasts, and there are some books around, but let's see if we can give them more of a platform.
I think it depends on how we evaluate wisdom as well, because I joke and say Dr. Google has a lot to answer for. People assume that knowledge is wisdom. And so we go and we have some information we need, and we go and Google it. It's become a word, hasn't it? Whatever search engine you use. And what you actually get is an opinion. And that opinion could have been written by anybody. It could have been put there deliberately to mislead and disempower. It could be there for so many reasons, yet we take it as fact and truth. And I think a big part, if I go back to the original topic of the rise of the feminine, for me, it's about recreating community. I think that's something that women do better than men. They bring people together. And I know of my female friends, we all have networks. And I think women, and yes, we use the internet, we use technology sometimes to do this and to feed our connections. But for me, the future has to contain a lot more community, because the old community of growing up in the same street as where your mother grew up there, your grandmother's down the road, your aunt is 2 streets away, that's gone. And I don't think that will come back. And I don't think it needs to come back. But I think we need to find ways of having community so that when you need help, you don't have to go far. You don't have to find a stranger. You can just ask your friend who says, you need to talk to this person, or these people could support you on this one. And
I think you're absolutely right. I think women do that naturally, and we have a men's group that we do a retreat with, but it's not sustained. Outside of that, there are only a few of us that stay in touch, and I'm sure if I needed something, I could ask them, but I'd have to be quite specific, and I don't just tend to phone them. A couple I'll just phone for a chat. Most of them, I'd love to be able to have that and have more of that community and looking after. So what advice, how do we create that for the men? If the women are doing it, what can we learn from that? And how do we need the women to do it for us? Are they going to, is that, men have been trying to do so much, from their standpoint. Maybe could we take a step back, and how could we let the feminine lead us on this without taking away masculinity?
I think that's a brilliant question, and I'm not sure I'm going to give you a full answer. I even have the answer. I think this is a process. I think for me, there's a lot of shifting that needs to happen, and the conditioning has happened to both men and women as to how we see women and how we see men. And that's only going to come from it's going to come from leadership. But I think it's just going to come, I think there's like loads of cells of people who are planted out there who are all doing this at the moment, and they're doing it on the ground. And I actually don't think this shift is going to come from on high. I think it's going to come from little people like you and me, and people who just start saying, oh, I've got a group, like you've got a men's group. And I think women have really started to do this quite publicly. It's become quite visible that there's lots of women's groups at the moment. If I wanted to do a retreat with women this weekend, I could probably find one. And they probably fit me in, even if it was full, because that's what women do. Yeah, women can get this support very easily where they're looking. I know if you do the same thing as a man, trying to find a men's retreat, you're probably talking months down the road and it's probably already full. And there's going to be a wait list. Yeah, because there isn't that much. Yeah. So I think there are men starting to create this kind of thing. And I think we need more. But it's not a solution. I think there's a cultural shift. And for me, a lot of it is about coming out of the head and back into the heart and the body.
So how do we do that? So how do can we put together 1, 2, or 3 steps or things that people can do to start doing that? So we can as we lead towards the end, we're running out of time. So if we can leave something with some practical, something like, okay, this is something I can do to help me tap in. So through all your experiences and the wisdom that you've achieved through going through your steps of coming back into your body and coming out from that numb state, as you said.
What would I say?
What were some real powerful tools?
I would, and this would apply to men or women, I would make sure I get out into nature, ideally every day, but at least 2 or 3 times a week. And if you live in the middle of a big city, there are things called parks and even a garden. It doesn't matter. We just need to remind ourselves that we don't live on this planet, we live with this planet. Because the healing power of green and nature, and I would do it with no technology plugged into my ears, ideally not even turned on. That's probably one thing I would say everyone, and I do everything I can to get out into nature as much as possible. And I live in a village, and I have to drive through it to get to work. So that was my choice. I would explore breath work, body work. I would anything. And if you can go online now, you can even just go and download the Wim Hof breathing stuff. There's loads of free stuff online, just where you can go and get basic exercises. You've probably got some stuff on your website where people can just use a bit of breath to actually get back into their body. And I wouldn't be a chiropractor if I didn't say this. Find yourself a chiropractor who resonates with you and get adjusted, ideally every week. Because chiropractors remove interference to life force in the body. And when your life force flows better, you flow better, you work better, you make different decisions, you behave in a different way, you have a different experience of your body. So if I was in charge of the country, I'd make sure everyone, we haven't got anywhere near enough chiropractors in this country, but that's what I would do. And that's I pretty much described to you what I do, and probably in no specific order. I get adjusted every week. I do a lot of breath work. I do cold therapy as well. I have a cold shower every day. And I get into nature as much as I can, because that keeps me aligned with who I am. And I am part of the planet. I'm part of this massive, incredible ecosystem called planet Earth. And if I live in a way where I just extract from her, that doesn't serve the future of humanity, the future generations. But if I connect to her on a regular basis, I have a completely different relationship to the planet and to myself. And honestly, a simple level, most of what I've said is
Absolutely.
free, and I feel so much better. And I want to feel as good as I can for as long as I can. So that would be where I would go.
Well, there you go. Oh, that's absolutely beautiful. I think you just summed it up so nicely. So, um, get into nature daily. Don't have any tech. Don't plug in your headphones. Don't flipping through Instagram while you're sitting in the sun, which I'm guilty of. Um, do some breath work. As you said, Wim Hof is a great place to start. If you have there's some holotropic type breath works, things like that, which we can really create shifts. And then find a chiropractor who resonates with you or you resonate with, so that you can get turned on and life can flow, as you said so beautifully. Rachael, it's been totally wonderful spending time with you and chatting, and I know we're going to do some more of that. So it's
Definitely.
been wonderful, and thanks for taking time out of your really busy schedule. I know it's been tough to squeeze in, so we're all hugely grateful for your time today.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great.
The link to Rachael's podcast, Unmasking the Feminine, is in the show notes. For chiropractors, you'll also find links to more information and booking details for Rachael's seminars on tonal examination and adjusting. My closing question to you this week is, in what areas of your life are you blocking your feminine energy? Till next time.